So I had somebody ask me about how I created this image earlier, how I masked out the flowers and stuff because they knew it was on a background. And I didn't actually do any masking at all. Instead, I used blend mode. So let me show you how I went about doing that. So here's the original image. I brought it into Photoshop, and it was something I got from Shutterstock. And the first thing I want to do, because I know that I'm going to add some text onto this document, I don't want to make the text too small because I want it to be in proportion and all that. So I want to resize the canvas a bit. And I know that many people would go up to image, canvas size, and change the size and do all that, which is fine. But a quicker way I find is to use a crop tool. And I know you're thinking I've lost it because the crop tool is to crop things, but you can also use a crop tool to extend the canvas. So I'm going to hit C for the crop tool. I'm going to drag out the right side. What do I want? I'm going to drag out the right side to get what I need and add a little to the top, and then I'm going to hit the check mark to accept. And now I've added to my canvas. And the next thing I want to do, I want to fill in the background, obviously, because I have transparency. And a quick way to add a layer, I want to add that layer below my image layer. So a quick way to do that is hold down the Control key when I click the Add New Layer button, because that will add it beneath the currently selected layer instead of on top, in which case I'd have to drag it below. But this way, holding down the Control key before clicking adds it below. And the next thing I want to do is fill it with white. And an easy way to do that, since my background color currently is white, I'm going to hit the keyboard shortcut of Control Backspace. And there we go. One thing you will notice though, if I zoom in down here a little bit, is there's kind of a harsh edge and it's really obvious, and we don't want that. So let's go back to the image layer, add a layer mask. I'm going to hit G for the gradient tool and swap my foreground and background colors so I have black, and make sure I have the second gradient selected, which is foreground to transparent. And then I'm just going to click and drag in a little bit. And you can see that takes the harsh edge off. I don't want it to go away, bring it in too far, because then I'll start to affect this flower, but just enough to get that harsh edge off. Once I've done that, I'm going to go get the texture I used. So I'll go back into Bridge, and I used the texture from Two Little Owls because it has, let me take this full screen by hitting the space bar. You can see it has a lot of nice texture. You can see the linen, the canvas coming through, and although I would normally make my own, I have these, and most people I figure would have this rather than make their own, so I'm just going to use this instead. So with that texture selected, I'm going to click and drag into Photoshop. I'll hit OK because I don't need Camera Raw, and then I'll hit Enter to accept. Now, like I said, rather than mask anything out, I'm going to let blend modes do all the work for me. And in this particular case, I know that I want to use multiply, and I'm going to hit the keyboard shortcut of Shift, Alt, and M. And you can see the flowers through, and it turns out pretty good. So no masking necessary, just change your blend mode. One thing I do notice though, and maybe this is just me, but on the bottom here, it's a little too brown for my liking. Maybe I'm just being picky, I don't know. But what I'm going to do is add a gradient fill, not a black to transparent though. I'm going to go with this violet to orange, and I'm going to reverse it and say OK. And you're looking at that going, well, that doesn't look real good, Jules. And you're right, it doesn't. But the first thing I need to do, because I only want it to affect the texture layer, is create a clipping mask. So right now we're a little bit better, not quite there yet. And then I want to change the blend mode. And I believe I want, lighten. That looks good. Seems a little strong to me though, so I'm going to take it down to about 50%. See if that's better. And I turn it on and off. It's kind of subtle. Maybe necessary, maybe not, but I like it better that way. Now the next thing I'm going to do, because I'm a bit of an organization freak, is I'm going to select all those layers, hit Control G to put them in a group, and I'll just call that one Image. And I'll even spell it right because that's the way I roll. Next thing I want to do is add my text. And I use Botanica Script Dry Brush, and I'm going to set it to a fairly large size. I'm going to hit T for the Type tool, and I'm going to type Spring, and I'll hit Control Enter to accept. hit V from my move tool so that I can hit Shift Alt, and then I can click and drag on the text and make a duplicate layer. And I like to do this because it's easier to align your text or format it the way you want when they're on separate layers. And what I mean by that is I don't want it directly. I'm going to play around with a little bit, and rather than use a lot of spaces and whatnot, I can click and drag this way. But the second line, I'm going to have it say Tulips, Control Enter to accept. Let's see if I can get those aligned a little bit. The next thing I want to do, I'm going to switch those layers around because I got to keep them organized, drives me crazy. I want to change the S in spring. Now you can, to a certain degree, at the bottom of the character panel, you can choose one of the different alternate options. But the problem is, that's only going to give you the first choice. It's not going to make all the different options available to you. So really what you need is a glyphs panel. And if you have CC 2015, you'll have access to the glyphs panel. And if you don't have CC 2015, the glyphs panel has been available in current and earlier versions of both Illustrator and InDesign for quite a while. And if you don't have that, then I would suggest Character Map in Windows or some such thing. Anyway, I want to change the S. So with the S selected, instead of entire font, I'm going to choose alternates for selection. And I want to use this S instead. So I'll just double click to select, hit the check to commit. And now with the move tool selected, I'm just going to align my text again. I want it right about there. Next thing I want to do is to angle the text a little bit. And rather than do it separately with two different layers and try and make sure they're aligned correctly, I'm going to select both of them together and then I'll rotate them. So with both layers selected, I'll hit Control T for the transform handles, drag it down to about where I want it, and then just click and drag outside to rotate. That looks close enough. Put it right about there. Hit OK to Enter key. Now one thing you'll notice looking at the text is that it doesn't blend very well. It's very solid sitting on top of the texture. It just looks like it was plopped on top. It doesn't blend into your scene at all. And the quickest and easiest way to fix that, again, is to go in and play with the blend modes. So I'll select both those layers. I'm going to change the blend mode this time to overlay. And now you can see the texture coming through. I'm going to hit Control G to put those both in a group. Now rather than change the color of both text layers individually, and I know there's only two, so it's not that big a deal, but if there were more, it would be kind of silly to have to change each layer individually. So what I'm going to do is add a solid color adjustment layer above that, say OK, and I'm going to clip it to the text group, and I'm going to change the blend mode to color. Now what I can do is double click on that thumbnail, and I'm going to select a color from the image itself. That way I don't have to worry about does it match or not. And that works for me. And I'll say OK. And there we go. That's how I created that image.